Charles here. Let's do a little inflation. And I've done this a number of times already today because I'm not really sure I'm happy with the way I'm saying some of this, but I'm going to do my best here for you guys. You should know if we're talking about inflation, recognize that we understand nominal minus inflation equals real. This is a very important formula for us. Nominal minus inflation equals real. Now, this is expected inflation that we're talking about. And this formula works here. I could have talked about GDP, which if we go back to the GDP multiple choice questions, this formula works really well. I could have been talking about wages. Nominal wages minus inflation equals real wages. That works perfectly fine. We should also know that we need to be able to flip this around a little bit. We could say real plus inflation equals nominal. Every so often they're going to ask us some kind of question about that. So we recognize that we can just flip that around and make sense of it. We should also recognize that the formula nominal minus inflation equals real if there's no inflation. Can we recognize that nominal and real have to be the same thing if there's no inflation? Like in our base year when we're doing CPI, right? In that base year, there's no inflation, so nominal GDP and real GDP are always the same thing. This is an important sort of understanding that we need to sort of be able to answer some of these inflation questions, is understand what's going on here. And we're just going to jump into them. This is kind of a pictograph kind of thing here, that expected and real is going to equal nominal. Obviously, if this is nominal and inflation goes up, I would expect real whatever to go down. I could have said real wages, real GDP. I could have said real interest rates. These formulas work with interest rates as long as they're percentages, etc. All right, let's talk about wages here for a second because I like what I've got here. I don't like how it's organized, but I do like what I've got. And let's just sort of say it and see if it makes sense, understanding this formula. Nominal minus inflation equals real. Think of it in with wages. Your nominal wage, let's say you get an increase in your nominal wage of 5%. So you get a raise of 5%. Your nominal wage is what you actually get paid. But inflation goes up by 10%. So if your nominal wage is 5% and inflation goes up by 10%, you are 5% poorer. 5 minus 10 is obviously negative 5. You have lost some real wage. See if this makes sense. I mean, the idea here is that what we've lost is what we call purchasing power. The money, you might be getting paid 5% more, but the price of everything went up by 10% more. Your real wage is your purchasing power. It implies, it shows exactly what you can put into your grocery cart, is the way I like to think of it, right? Your purchasing power is what you can put into your grocery cart. So if the price level, or the price of all goods go up higher than the amount of wage increase you get, you can buy less goods. If the price level goes up, purchasing power goes down. Real wages is the wage of really represented in what you can buy. So you can buy 5% less. Let's play this game again. What if I had gotten a raise of 10% and then the price of everything went up by 10%? Well, we recognize that our real wage would not have changed, right? Not only did we get a nominal increase in our wages, the inflation went up also. Price of everything went up by 10%. So I'm no better off. I didn't lose, but I didn't win. And this is important. When prices start going up, if you don't get a raise, you can buy less stuff. You're worse off than before. Obviously, if my nominal wage goes up by 20%, right, and inflation is only 10%, well, now my real wage, I can buy 10% more stuff. I hope we can see that relationship there. Easy enough. All right. Let's just jump into some of these and see if we can do them and see if we can make sense of them. Oops. From past times when I was answering some of these, I left the answers there. That's okay. Because a couple of these are a little tricky and a little further than we need to go. This one we probably don't need to talk about, but I'm going to throw it at you real quick. You can skip through it if you don't want to talk about it. So read number 2, stop everything, see if you can find the right answer. You should know that anticipated is the same thing as expected inflation. So anticipated is, if I could spell it correctly, anticipated, whatever, is the same thing as expected. So recognize that we definitely just need to find the right formula here and how they gave it to us. And the answer is B. It is real plus inflation equals nominal, right? So we have to know that and just be able to pick it out of a crowd. It is an old question, but it wouldn't surprise me if they threw it at you again. This one probably shouldn't be in this section because this one should probably be brought up when we're talking about the Phillips curve. And let's talk about the Phillips. If you're not done the Phillips curve, you can just skip through this part. But our Phillips curve is the long run Phillips curve and then the short run Phillips curve. It is inflation on the vertical. It is unemployment on the horizontal. Now, what you have to know is that dot right there where they come together, that is what we call expected inflation. And you have to know that. They've asked it lately on a number of FRQs. So make sure you know that dot where those two come together is expected inflation. Now, if decision makers underestimate inflation, what happens to your real wage? Again, the formula is nominal minus inflation equals real. What we recognize is that when they say decision makers underestimated inflation, they're implying that inflation must have gone up. Anytime price levels go up or inflation goes up, I know that real wages have to go down because I know purchasing power, we can buy less stuff, has gone down due to those higher prices. So I can already know that it's got to be a fall in the real wage. I know purchasing power, real wages are going down. Now, this is what gives me a little bit of pause here. But I should be able to recognize that if this is inflation on the vertical, if we have inflation, we're moving up our short run Phillips curve. So let's say that inflation has gone from expected inflation, which would be right there, and inflation has gone up. Well, when inflation goes up, our short run Phillips curve shows that unemployment has to go down. Remember, this is our short run trade off between inflation and unemployment. Inflation goes up, unemployment goes down, inflation goes down, unemployment goes up. Recognize that that is just a Phillips curve understanding. Don't worry too much about it if you're not there yet. This one should be pretty simple. They're giving us nominal GDP. These are really just GDP questions, but I think they're important to recognize in this inflation area if you've skipped it. If you did skip the GDP multiple choice questions, go back. There's a number of these and you'd want to see them. Now, let's just write nominal minus inflation equals real. We know we're talking about GDP here. Nominal GDP grew by 11. Real GDP grew by 4. Well, if it's nominal minus inflation equals real, got to be 7%. Can we see that? 11 minus 7 equals 4. Easy enough. Number 17, same kind of question. Nominal minus inflation equals real. Helps us with this. As soon as we saw nominal, we saw some real. We know what we're doing here. We plug in the numbers. Looks like nominal went up by 7. Real went up by 3. That implies that inflation had to go up by 4%, right? So nominal GDP went up by 3%. Oh, nominal went up by 7. Inflation had to be 4. Take a look at these and see if one of these makes sense to you. The only one that really makes sense is B. Price level and inflation are the same thing. You need to know it. Anytime inflation's going up, the price level has to be increasing also. All right, let's look at 35. In the country of agronomia, banks charge 10% interest on loans. If the general price level has been increasing rate of 4%, the real interest rate. Now, whether we're talking about GDP or interest rates or wages, same formula helps us. Nominal minus inflation, that's why it's so important. Real. Mostly you need to figure out not only to know this formula, but also when to use it. Pretty straightforward here. Banks charging 10% on all loans. That's your nominal interest rate that's being charged of 10%. Inflation price level increased at a rate of 4%. Banks made the real interest rate they made on their money was 6%. Can we see that okay? Pretty straightforward there. All right, look at 21. It's being a little tricky here because they're using output. Now, right now, if we just got to inflation, this question you can probably skip because it's a little more complicated. What we should recognize that if we're, and I'm going to go ahead and again, if we're drawing our aggregate demand and aggregate supply curve graphs, we have long run aggregate supply, we have short run aggregate supply, and we have, oh boy, that's embarrassing. I can't believe I did that. My brain's moving either faster or, you know, when you get old, your brain gets smaller, right? You can't remember stuff. So that was pretty embarrassing. Short run aggregate supply. Nobody's gotten here yet this year when I'm doing this. So I'm kind of just having to bring it all back to my brain. Usually it's muscle memory. I've done it so much. So this is our aggregate demand and aggregate supply curve graph, which you will have to know extremely well by the time you get through with this if you want to make a 5. Recognize that real GDP is the same thing as saying output. But understand that underneath your long run aggregate supply, we use YF. And this implies full employment. It also is incomes at full employment. The Y stands for incomes here. Usually if I show aggregate demand shifting to the left here, at that point, I can see that the price level has gone down. We'll call that PL1, PL2. And I can see that usually I would just say real GDP has decreased to Y1. I could have also just as easily said output has decreased to Y1. We should know that it also, the Y stands for incomes. So as we're in a recession here, as real GDP and output has gone down, people are making less money in their economy. Incomes, national incomes, have gone down. So we can use incomes here and output interchangeably. I know that's confusing as all get out. Do your best with it and just kind of put it in your big brains and see if you can remember that, right? So the same formula I'm going to use, nominal minus inflation equals real. We are talking about real output. So if I saw that, the first thing I'm going to think about is nominal output because those two go together. Real remains the same or doesn't change, so it would be 0. They told me inflation was 10%, so real output had to go up by 10%. If inflation goes up, if nominal goes up by 10 and inflation, real output wouldn't change. Or I could just play games with that and say nominal income went up by 10%. Inflation, though, went up by 10%. Therefore, nominal, oops, that's nominal national income there. That was the answer. Because we know real output or real incomes didn't change at all. And this should make sense, even if we're looking at it from a standpoint of wages. If nominal wage goes up by 10 and inflation goes up by 10, real wages didn't change. We could have just substituted the word income in there, and that'll still do the same thing for us. A bit tricky. Probably could have been left out of this section because it's a little further than just, anyway, I like talking about it. 4. This is pretty straightforward. If a worker's nominal wage increases by 10 to 12, and at the same time the general price level increases by 10%, the worker's real wage has done what? So same formula, nominal minus inflation equals real. What was the now? Here's tricky. I was working with someone today, and they wanted to just say that the nominal wage increased by $2. But recognize that we're talking about percentages here, right? We're looking what happened to the real wage, and we're looking all for percentages. So I think what we should recognize is we went from 10 to 12. We need a percentage for a nominal wage, and that's 20%, right? It went up by 2 out of 10. Got to be 0.2 or 20%. Inflation, they told me, or the price level went up by 10%. The wage, the nominal wage increased by 20. Inflation went up by 10. Therefore, your real wage increased by 10%. Can we see that? Does that make sense how we did that and how we looked at that? Just put it in your brain. write the question up, make sure you've got it somewhere so you could do it yourself and just plug it into that big brain of yours and you'll be fine. All right. Let's talk about the difference between winners and losers. This is a hard thing. Not hard to figure out. Not hard to figure out. I think lots of people are able to figure out who's a winner and losers. The problem is explaining it sometime and getting that extra point on the FRQ. How do we explain that? So we're going to try to do both here today. The easiest thing to understand is anytime there's inflation, we would say lenders, the bank, will lose, and we'll talk about why in just a minute, but borrowers or debtors win. Anytime there's deflation or price level goes down, inflation goes down, lenders, creditors, bankers win, borrowers, debtors would lose. Now, this doesn't make much sense in itself, so let's talk about it. Understand that, and it's the same formula we used before, really, nominal minus, but this time I'm going to use the words expected inflation equals real. Understand that bankers, and that's who I like to talk about, who we're thinking about, if they expect inflation to go up by 5%, my question to you would be, what would be the nominal interest rate? Because bankers use interest rates, right? They're going to loan you a certain amount of money and they're going to expect to make a certain amount of money. If bankers expect inflation to go up by 5%, what is the minimum interest rate they would charge you for a loan? Or let's say you're loaning money to somebody. Bankers are never going to loan you the minimum. They're going to try to make more. They're going to guess what inflation is, and they're going to charge you more than that because they've got to make some profit. But let's say this is you, and you think the price level is going to go up by 5%. What would be the nominal interest rate you would charge somebody close to you? What's the minimum amount you would charge, right? Maybe let's say 5%. So you charge somebody 5%, whoever that person is. Inflation or the price level goes up by 5%. You've made nothing on your money. Your real interest rate, what you can actually buy with the money paid back to you, cannot buy any more stuff. Again, real implies purchasing power, right? You loan somebody money and you made 5% on that money, and then the price of everything went up by 5%. You can buy the exact same stuff before you loaned them the money. Even though you charged them 5%, you lost 5% somehow due to the price level, right? So we recognize 5% nominal minus inflation equals real. Pretty easy. But let's say that instead of 5%, the actual inflation rate went up. The actual rate of inflation went up to 10% when you loaned somebody 5%. Well, your real interest rate was a -5. You've lost money. So again, when there's inflation, and this is the important part to remember, when there's inflation, banks lose, right? Obviously, maybe not obviously, borrowers would win. And that's always bothered me. What do you mean win? I mean, I understand banks lose because they can buy 5% less stuff because of the price level went up. How do borrowers win? And we could say this two different ways. I mean, we could say borrowers win because the money that they pay back can now buy less stuff. So I've never really liked that. I would love to say that when banks lose, let's just look over here on the cheat sheet because I think I kind of get lost in it too. I know what to say, but again, I want to stay on track here. Banks lose due to the higher inflation, right? The bank is being paid back a loan with fewer real dollars, or the dollars being paid back this borrower to the bank has less real value, right? It can buy less stuff. I like to say it has less purchasing power, right? The purchasing power has gone down due to that high inflation rate or high price level. College Board loves the word purchasing power, right? So bankers win because they're paying back money to the bank that is now worth less. I like that. I would stick with that. I think that's probably the easiest thing to sort of understand. The opposite of this is if the inflation rate, instead of staying at 5% when we loaned money at 5%, actually went down to 1%. Prices actually fell. So this would mean anytime there's deflation, this would have meant you loaned money at 5%, And the real interest rate banks made on their money was 4%, right? They've actually can buy 4% more stuff due to those lower prices, if that makes sense. I hope it does. So we would say when deflation happened, banks win, but borrowers lose. They're having to pay back money that has a higher purchasing power than when they borrowed it. See how I just flipped that around? When inflation happens, borrowers win because they're paying back money that has less purchasing power. When deflation happens, borrowers lose because they're paying back money that has a higher purchasing power. When the price level goes down, deflation, purchasing power goes up. If you could say that, you're pretty golden. You could have also said borrowers lose because they're paying back money that has more real value. The real value of that money, what it can actually buy, has gone up. We kind of beat this to death, but I think it's important to know how to say it because that's how you're going to get that extra point on the FRQ. There's a lot of multiple choice questions about who loses and who wins. All right, let's go see if we can do some of these. All right, look at number 28. Which of the following would be hurt, who loses, with inflation? Now, the first thing I'm going to do like a child is I'm going to know that when inflation happens, I know banks, you want to say it for me? Banks lose, and I know borrowers win. So that's the first thing I'm looking for. Who would be hurt or who would lose? Banks lose, creditor lose. Can we see that? Now, they've thrown something else, and this is a whole question, but most of the time we're always thinking of a fixed rate loan. A fixed rate loan implies that I loan you money at 5%. It can't change. You are going to pay me back 5%, and that's it. You're done. A variable rate loan would be that if I loaned you money at 5% and the price level went up to 10%, your loan changes too, and now you owe me 10% on that loan. Bankers build this in. And that's why variable rate loans are cheaper because bankers know that if the price level was to go up to 10%, that now what you have to pay back now just went up to 10%. If the price level goes up by 20%, your loan, just what you have to pay back now just went up to 20%. That's a variable rate loan. So borrowers would not be hurt more. Their loan is going up, but they certainly wouldn't be hurt like a creditor would be. A creditor is going to be damaged much more by that due to we know they lose anytime there's inflation. That's the only thing I can see that might be confusing there. Let's look at 47. Which of the following groups of people would benefit from inflation? Again, I write it out in my head. Inflation, bankers lose. Borrowers win. So a saver is going to lose no matter what. I put $1,000 in the bank and inflation goes up by 50%. Well, you can now buy $500 worth of stuff that you could before. You've lost 50% of your money due to that higher price level. So savers are definitely going to be hurt. They would not benefit. I know that bankers lose when there's inflation, and I know that's a lender. So I'm just going to jump there and make sense of it. Let's look at 53. Which of the following would be true if the actual rate of inflation were less than the expected rate of inflation? So stop it. Read those. See which one you like. And again, I know with expected inflation, it's nominal minus expected inflation equals real. I know when there is more inflation, I know I've said it a lot, but it's important. Bankers lose. The borrowers win. But this one says inflation were less than expected. So instead of us being here, we've actually had deflation. I know when the rate of the actual inflation rate, let's call it the actual because that helps, inflation rate has gone down. I know that bankers therefore win and borrowers would lose. Pretty simple. Let's see if we can find it. People who borrowed funds at the nominal interest rate during the time period would lose, right? This should make sense. They borrowed money when the prices were high, when the price level was higher. If they would have waited and borrowed now, the price level would be lower and they'd probably get a cheaper loan. So that's kind of our understanding there. We could also say, again, borrowers lose because they're paying back money that has a higher purchasing power. Again, that's your explanations on your FRQs, and you do want those extra points. So being able to say it right way is lovely. All right, take a look at number 2. Which of the following groups would most likely gain from inflation? Ooh, I'm going to write it out again. Inflation means bankers lose, borrowers win. Easy enough. Are we looking for winners? Yeah, gainers, winners. Individuals who borrowed money at a fixed interest rate, right? They would definitely win. We can see that. 34. Which of the following statements is true about inflation? Anytime we're talking about inflation, again, bankers lose, borrowers win. And if all you want to do is remember that, you can flip that around in your head enough and know that if there's deflation, we just flip it around. Bankers would win, borrowers would lose. However, you've got to write it up and put it in your brain so that you can remember it. Which of the following statements is true about unanticipated inflation? It would not decrease everybody by the same. That doesn't make any sense. It would not decrease economic well-being of everybody equally. It increases the well-being of net creditors. A banker is a creditor, so that's wrong. It increases the economic well-being. Borrowers win. A borrower is a debtor. All right, so you just have to know that language there. If you haven't come across debtor or borrower, put them together, make sure you know that. Bankers would be creditors, lenders, something like that, right? Anything, you know what's going on there. I'll shut up. All right, I think that's it. Those are all that we have from inflation. Remember, go back and look at those, or send me an email for a cheat sheet so that I can send these to you. Anything else we want to talk about? No, some of this comes later. Anything over here? No, I think we've covered it. Some of it's a little tighter language on the cheat sheets. All right, my friends, keep working hard. You did great, and good luck. Let me know if I can help. I'm on Wise Ant, tutoring away. My name is Charles W. And we would want to go over some of the more other questions that the College Board has given out other than these released. All right, my friends, be safe. Take care. Bye.